It depends on what you mean by deserve. Deserve success or deserve salvation? Because number one, nobody deserves salvation. It's a gift. It's a free gift, and that is so amazing. That when I heard somebody say that grace is being given something you don't deserve, and mercy is not being given something you do deserve. And I love that. I heard that for the first time about a month ago, and I've quoted it so many times.
The Sales Proformance Show.
Welcome back to the Sales Proformance Show, everybody. I'm your host, Dave Slyman, and I am honored to welcome a guest today. He's not only a celebrated member of the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame, but he has been recognized in Magazine's Inc., one of top 100 leadership speakers and ranked among the top 50 speakers in the world. This guy is touching lives not only in this country, but also around the world. His insight to leadership, personal development, growth, and captivating audiences is well-renowned. He's also written over 20 books, and we're going to talk about his latest book today, The Coming American Revival, which explores the future of America, and we're going to talk about all that great stuff. We're going to get into his personal development life, and we're going to talk about his book as well. So without further ado, Chris Widener, welcome to the show today. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I am super excited. We actually got introduced from past guests, Gary Varnell, was on the show, and he introduced us. He called me. He's like, you gotta talk to Chris. This guy's great. You got to get him on the show. I loved your show. I think he's going to be a great guest for you. And then we connected a couple of weeks ago when I was driving out to California. And I'm real excited to have you on the show. Yeah. So talk to me about your path. We're going to get to the book. I want to talk a little bit, give our guests a little bit of an idea about your personal background, but your motivational speaking and how this all evolved for you.
Sure, I'll give you the brief rundown.
Yes.
And by brief, I mean it'll take me a couple minutes.
Yeah.
It's down from about 20 minutes in one of my speeches. So I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. My dad was a very wealthy, not wealthy. He was a very high income earning person, as you'll know in a minute. He was the fifth partner at an architecture firm called NBBJ. He was their chief financial officer. And at the time, 1970, he had 150 architects. Now NBBJ probably has 7,500 architects and an office in every major city around the world. They did the Google campus, among others. Very, very high prestigious company. 1970 was, he died in 1970, got cancer, died. In 1969, he made $90,000, 1969.
Okay.
And, but he only had $30,000 worth of life insurance. So number one lesson you're going to learn today, go get life insurance. I think about if he would have had a 1-hour meeting with a life insurance agent, my life would have been completely different. Now, that being said, part of who I am is because of the life that we ended up. My mom had to sell the house that we were living in. That house recently sold for $3.8 million. She had to sell it because she couldn't afford a $400 a month mortgage payment. Now, in 1970, a $400 mortgage payment was pretty hefty. My mom had borderline personality disorder. And so we ended up big spiral after my dad died. My closest sibling was 9 years older than me. So I was basically raised as an only child. 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice, once in the 4th grade, once in the 9th grade, started drugs in the 6th grade, did opium for the first time in the 8th grade, made my money growing up as I bet the horses at Longacres Horse Track and did pretty well. So you're kind of getting an idea of where I was going, right?
And then I had all the vices going on, right?
Like junior year of high school, I was spending the night at one of my biggest pot smoking buddies' house on a Saturday night. Sunday morning, his mother throws the door open and says, "Get up, we're going to Sunday school." Now, you have to understand, I was so irreligious. I literally had never heard the term Sunday school before. I have no clue what you're talking about, Sunday school. Like it's 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday. We're going to school. But I thought to myself, you know what? I've tried everything else. May as well try this Sunday school thing.
Yeah.
And there was a youth minister at this little Lutheran church. It's called Mount Si Lutheran Church at the corner of 8th and Ogle in a little town in the Cascade Mountains called Mount Sinai Lutheran, a little town called North Bend, Washington. Ended up becoming a Christian, went to Bible college, became a youth minister in one of the wealthiest communities in the country. My first business mentor was at the time he was senior vice president. He eventually became the CEO of Mars Candies, just a little $30 billion a year company. And ended up moving to Seattle, started 3 churches as a church planter. In 2002, I decided to go and write and speak full time. And over the course of the next 7 years, 2002 to 2009, I immediately started ghostwriting for a guy named John Maxwell. That opened the door to a guy named Jim Rohn, who I spent 7 years working with.
One of my favorites.
Yep.
Yes.
I worked 7 years with Jim, did speaking engagements with him, emceed a lot of his events, wrote his last book, a book called 12 Pillars, and then was asked to co-host a television show with a guy named Ziglar. So people say, how'd you build your speaking career? I said, really simple 3-step process. First, have John Maxwell call you. Second, have Jim Rohn call you. Third, have Ziglar call you. And after that, it's really kind of easy.
And then just write some stuff for me, okay?
Just write some stuff. But I'll tell you what, there is a lesson there. And I've been thinking about writing a book. I don't know if I'll ever get around to it, but I want to write a book called The Power of Second Fiddle. Okay. And the reason is my whole career took a giant leap when I was willing to not be the star of the show. I ghost wrote for John, but that put me in proximity with John and his team. Yeah. I basically was ghostwriter and co-author with Jim, emceed his events. I wasn't the star of the events, but people would call and ask if Jim could come and speak. And they're like, well, he's busy, but what about Chris? I ended up doing tons of events just because Jim couldn't, because he was booked so much. And then of course, still to this day, you can go to YouTube and Google True Performance, Ziglar, and you'll see me co-hosting his TV show. People say, how long ago was that? And I say about 30 pounds ago. So you'll see a much younger, thinner Chris Widener there. But that was really how I got to where I am. I've written 25 books, 14 languages, and lots of ups, lots of downs. But that's the brief overview of how I ended up here.
I want to back up, Chris, okay? Because you obviously went through a real challenging childhood, from dependency and the gambling and all those things. What was the pivotal moment for you when you made the switch to change your life? I really want to know that. Was there a pivotal moment, or was there a series of events? I'd like to hear that a little bit.
Well, it was in that little Lutheran church.
Yeah.
And they had a youth minister. His name is Sam. In fact, I talked to him this morning. He pastors a little tiny church in Timbuktu, Montana. In fact, you got to go to Timbuktu, go 10 miles past it, turn right on the dirt road, go another 30 miles into the middle of nowhere. But he had a profound impact on me. And I always say there's 2 things he had that I needed. Number 1, size 11 cowboy boots. Because I had no male role model figure. One grandpa ran off with somebody. I met him one time my entire life. The other grandpa, literally the only thing I remember about him is laying on the couch with an emphysema oxygen mask on. He died. I don't remember any conversations with the guy. My dad died. I had an older brother, 13 years older than me, married a girl who hated my mother, so I rarely saw him. I had no male role models in my family. So Sam was really good for me on that. But the other thing that Sam taught me was about how God loved me and had a purpose for my life. And I was purposeless. I mean, people have always said, oh, you're so talented and, this, that, and the other thing. But talent and skill without purpose is nothing. And I was using it for the wrong area. So in July of 1983, Sam packed up about 30 of us and put us in canoes on a lake in eastern Washington called Lake Chelan. And beautiful, amazing lake. It's like 30 miles long, and became a Christian summer before my senior year of high school. And that was really the revolutionary moment in my life where I stopped living for myself and started living for God. Yeah. And again, lots of ups, lots of downs, lots of times I felt great about it. Lots of times I shook my fist at God and said, why is this happening? Whatever. Yeah. But it's a relationship. And that's, I think, something we need to learn, is that having a relationship with God is like having a relationship with a person. There's ups and there's downs, there's swings. He's always faithful. He's always there. He's always forgiving and always kind. But us as people, we're not all the time.
All the time.
But 41 years into it, it's the best decision I ever made in my life.
I think, I want to really dig into the belief, because you and I look at it this way, and the older I get, the more that I've even derived my faith as a whole. And I think there's a thing, the belief you can be great, right? I think there's so many people out there where they just don't really believe that either they deserve it or that they can be great. And I think once you kind of wrap your mind around it, that, listen, we're all individuals, things aren't always going to go right for us, we're not always going to have things fall our way, but sometimes those challenges are the things that really build us as build our souls and builds us as humans, as across the board. Talk to me about your belief in that, somebody really believing in the fact that they deserve it.
Well, it depends on what you mean by deserve. Deserve success or deserve salvation? Because number one, nobody deserves salvation.
Yes.
It's a gift. It's a free gift. And that is so amazing that when I heard somebody say that grace is being given something you don't deserve, and mercy is not being given something you do deserve. And I love that. I heard that for the first time about a month ago, and I've quoted it so many times. Grace is being given something you don't deserve, and mercy is not being given something you do deserve. So, but in terms of success, the reason I got into public speaking was I read this book, or somebody gave me a book and asked me my thoughts on it. And I thought, how come Christians don't talk about success? Well, this was before I really kind of learned about Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and those kinds of guys. But I was a young pastor, 25 years old. And so I started teaching success from the Bible, because the Bible has a lot to say about success. In fact, my life verse is a verse, John 10:10. And Jesus said, "The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly." And I thought, abundant life, that sounds fantastic. That's what I want. I want an abundant life. Now, you also bring up challenges. One of the most true things that Jesus ever said, I mean, everything he said was true, but one of the things that really resounds, I think, for a lot of people is he said, "In this world, you'll have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world." Being a Christian doesn't mean that you don't have trouble. We all have trouble. In fact, I was talking to one of my wealthier friends. He does a couple $100 million a year in business and having some real struggles with family and illness and things like that. I was just talking to him yesterday about it. And I said, so many people think, if I just had enough money, if I had that guy's money. And he said, "Oh, I hate that." He said, "I wish they knew the struggles that you go through, even with money." And I said, really, money, about all money really does is allow you to have a nicer house and a nicer car, and to be able to fix your transmission when it goes out. Other than that, people get sick, people betray you. In this world, you'll have trouble. The Bible in James chapter 1 says, "Consider it pure joy when you encounter trials of various kinds." Why? Because, as the Bible says, uh, uh, problems create perseverance. Perseverance develops character, and character produces hope. And so the troubles that we go through are designed to make us stronger. And there's lots of analogies, like going into the gym, when you're lifting, it actually tears the muscle fibers,
Yeah.
become stronger. So I've always looked at troubles in this life as being something that makes us better. You can either whine about it or you can learn from it. And I really believe that God understands the human plight, understands the troubles and the struggles that we go through. He came and lived a life among us. The book of Hebrews, one of my favorite passages, talks about that we don't have a high priest that doesn't understand us. Jesus gets it, right? I mean, they murdered the guy, for crying out loud, and yet it says, "Therefore we can boldly come before the throne of grace." I love that image. Now, for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans,
Yeah.
Picture that throne room with that giant throne up there. Now, typically, if
All
a king was
sorts.
sitting there, if we came in and that king was up there and we were just a peasant or we were just a peon we would come like this, right? We'd bow our heads but we're not. We're children of God. How would the child of the king approach that throne? The child of that king would approach the throne with his head up and his arms out. We boldly come before that throne because it's not a throne of judgment, it's a throne of grace. And I just love that, but it's in the context of God understanding what we go through. So when we have that relationship with God, we don't come in fear. We don't come in timidity. We come with boldness because we know the King. We're heirs of God, co-heirs of Christ, and I think it just gives you a whole new perspective.
Yeah.
We don't come arrogantly. We still come humbly,
Right.
but we come as a humble child, not as a fearful peasant.
Yeah. It's one of the first things I really resonate in my sales trainings is being open to receive. And it's the same thing in what you're talking about, right? To be
Yep.
open to receive and not so much judgment, but to really identify as a human being with faith and all the things that you're talking about here, which I think is great. And then another thing that you talked about earlier was wealth. And so many times we associate wealth with what's in our bank account, the car we drive, the house that we have. And again, it being more mature and getting older and more gray hairs here and all that good stuff, what you really recognize, and I was actually at my daughter's wedding and I was talking about this, the real wealth are the moments you have with your children, the moments you have growing up, the vacations and spending the time with your wife or with your kids and seeing them grow. And those moments are not always positive. Sometimes those moments are challenges. And I always say it's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. I think you and I, it's something you said earlier as well. But the real wealth is looking back on those moments that you have and cherishing them with the ones you love and the people that you appreciate. And again, I think so many times people put so much nominal things on wealth when the real wealth is your family and the relationships that you have with individuals, and whether that's your family or close friends, even for that matter. So I think it's a good point that you brought up.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this as well. So, one of the things, so I want to shift just a little bit here, okay? Because you have spoken in front of, some of the biggest companies in the world, for that matter. Enterprise, AT&T, Cisco. Those companies are very influential. They've got huge sales force. They've got a lot of moving parts to them. And you talked about your 4 golden rules of influence. Can you talk about those a little bit? Because I think it's really made, just me reading those made an impact on myself.
Yeah, most people, when they want to be successful at something, they say, "Tell me what to do." So, for example, I want to have a great marriage. Tell me what I need to do. I want to become wealthy. Tell me what I need to do. I want to be a better salesperson. Tell me what I need to do. And working with Ziglar, who is, up until this point in my life, the finest man I ever met, Zig always said the world is missing one other part to that equation. It's not do, have. It's not tell me what I need to do so I can have what I want to have. It's be, do, have. And he drove even deeper down to the character level. And so I'm not the guy you hire to teach you sales skills. I'm the type of person you hire to talk about sales character or leadership character. Now, I can talk about sales skills, I can talk about leadership skills, but ultimately it really comes down to your character, because people make a decision at the conscious or the subconscious level on whether or not they want you to influence them based on who they believe you are. And so, there's lots of people who have lots of skills, but you just don't trust them. And so you don't do business with them. And so what I teach people is 4 primary, in my speeches. In my audio programs, there's 12, but in my speeches, there's usually 4. And the first one is integrity. It's always the first one. The other 3 you can put in whatever order you want. But number one is always integrity, because integrity breeds trust. When people know that you have integrity, they trust you. The second one is a positive attitude. And people admire people with a positive attitude.
Yeah.
And a positive attitude brings admiration, because people say, wow, can you believe that lady, everything she's gone through, and yet she still does this, right? The third one is service, serving other people. In fact, in every speech I give, I always quote Zig: you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want out of life. And service breeds loyalty in people. If they know that you are looking out for them, they will remain loyal. That comes in very handy during bad times. And then lastly is the character trait of excellence, the commitment to excellence, because excellence breeds respect. So the way we gain trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty is through those four things: integrity, excellence, um, positive attitude, and service. And so trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty. That's what I teach people how to get. And think about it. How would your business be if other people trusted you, respected you, admired you, and were loyal to you? So that's really the four golden rules that I talk about in the book, The Art of Influence.
Yeah, it's so impactful. And I talk about, these things to live by, and, integrity, not being scared to fail, right?
Yeah.
Having respect. And most importantly, the thing that I see different between great leaders or people who are successful and who are not is the one word, and I use that, and it's consistency.
Yep.
You have to be consistent. And if you can apply those, I think it aligns with, some of the things that you're saying here. And I think that's very, very impactful.
Well, I always say the difference between the successful and the unsuccessful is not the absence of obstacles, but the presence of perseverance, similar to consistency, right? Because perseverance is rooted in consistency. You just keep going, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, if you saw who was in my phone, rock stars, professional athletes, billionaires, and they all have problems. We just look at the Bentley and the mansion and go, wow, wouldn't life be great? Yeah, until you realize that 12,000 square foot mansion is filled with fighting with his wife every night.
Yeah.
You want that? You don't want that. Right. And so I think it's an understanding that the difference between the successful and the unsuccessful is not the absence of obstacles. It's the presence of perseverance and tenacity and consistency and discipline. As Jim Rohn used to talk so much about discipline, that's really the difference between successful and unsuccessful.
Yeah. And I think going into the fact of, we all know you and I can translate the difference between motivation and discipline, right? Being able to do something over time to achieve a result. I mean, everybody wants to achieve a result with discipline, and everybody wants to achieve a result with motivation. But the difference was with discipline, you can do it over time, and you do it at times when you don't want to. Yeah. That's a big thing.
And I used to get hired a lot by this gal. She's ended up becoming a good friend of ours. Excuse me. She's made over $100 million in network marketing. And she used to hire me to come in and speak to her network marketing teams. And I would say, how many of you, she'd be sitting on the front row, I'd say, how many of you would love to get Donna's check every month? And everybody wants Donna's check, right? And I said, how many of you are willing to do what Donna does every single day? Right? It's funny. Literally, she's still top 5 women of all time, probably top 20 people of all time in network marketing. And we'll go down there. Her and her husband live in Scottsdale, and we used to live in Scottsdale. So we'll go down there and we'll stay at their house. I kid you not, she makes more money than 50 people combined. And 9:00 on a Sunday night, she's on a Zoom meeting talking to people. She's still busting her hind end to keep that business going. And now not so much even for herself, but for all the other people that she has helped gain their own success and create, generational wealth for their own families. And she's out working and hustling. And I know tons of people in all sorts of industries. And, people say, oh man, if I get rich, I'm going to go just spend all my time on a beach. And I go, if with that attitude, you'll never get rich, because the people who get rich, they're not getting rich so they can go sit on a beach.
That's the truth. And that's so funny, right? Because when you've got your motor running, I was just having this conversation the other day with a gentleman who just sold one of his companies, friend of mine. He's on one of my recent podcasts. We've become friends, and he has a tough time shutting his brain off, and he's really beating himself up over this a lot. And I said, listen, I understand, but think about it too. This is what got you here. This is what got you. Your motor running has gotten you to this point. And there are not a lot of people, I shouldn't say not a lot of people, but the percentage of people who can do what you did and cannot, as you were mentioning with your example earlier, to be able to go through and keep your motor running and push and persevere and do that, you gotta appreciate it. So you just have to respect it, I say, but don't try to turn it off. That's not.
Yeah. Now, some of those guys, they also need to be told they need to take a vacation every now and then, right? And when I work with people, it's like, I was a pastor for 12 years, so I've got sort of this dual role, success coach / spiritual, leader, spiritual pastor kind of guy. And so, there are times when you need to tell people, hey, you need to take a break.
Yeah.
Like, you need to get home by 6:00 for the next few weeks and give some attention to your wife. There are times, but people are, God created some people just to be that kind of person. There's people that I look at, and I don't know what you think of Trump. I don't want to get into politics, but I'll tell you one thing. If I was 78 years old, worth $7 billion, I wouldn't be hauling my cookies off on the trail what that guy does by noon every day would exhaust me if I had to do it in a week.
It's unbelievable.
And there are guys, again, I don't want to get into politics. I'm not making a political comment here.
Yeah.
But I don't know how that guy does it. And not just him, there Elon Musk running all these companies, and Mark Cuban, same thing. I heard an interesting thing Cuban said about 6 months ago. They asked him, if you lost all your money, how long would it take you to become a billionaire again? He said, I could never become a billionaire again. And they were like, really? Why? And he goes, being a billionaire is kind of right place, right time. Like if Bill Gates would have been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, we'd have never heard of him. And he said the same thing. He said, I was right place, right time and I had a good idea at the birth of the internet. And that's how I ended up with $2 billion. And I appreciated that.
Yeah.
He did say, though, he said, I would definitely become a millionaire, probably tens of millions, because I know business and I know how to do it. And I'm driven and those kinds of things. But I thought it was really interesting that, and probably let a lot of people breathe a good sigh of relief. Like, he recognizes that there was a little bit of luck there.
Yeah, and it's kind of off what you said, but I was listening to Ed Millett, and he's another motivational guy.
Yeah.
And he was talking about with somebody, and they said, all the money you made and everything, what would you change? And he goes, I'll tell you what, I give you every dollar I've made, billions of dollars, all the planes, everything, to put me back 20 more years. Because I would do, and I'd give up all the money and everything because I would be able to do it again. It's just when you've understood, I wouldn't say there's not a blueprint, but when you understand what it takes and you understand the fundamentals, and then you understand and you can execute, there's nothing. You'll achieve success. But again, it comes back to that word we said earlier, which I think is consistency. It really
Absolutely.
is. Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about your latest book. Okay.
Sure.
Let's talk about your latest book and the coming revival, the coming American revival, and describe what inspired you about this book. Let's start there.
Well, I was writing my 25th book called The Capitalist. And for anybody who's read my books, I kind of have a niche in that I write 20,000 word fictional accounts of a mentor and a mentee. And so I've written, a bunch of those books, different situations, different scenarios. The Capitalist, which actually John Maxwell's company is going to publish it. I've already worked that out with them. They're going to do my next book called The Capitalist.
Okay.
And The Capitalist is about a 90-year-old woman. The book opens with a 90-year-old woman who calls her 45-year-old billionaire grandson and says, I'm getting old. Would you host a family reunion at your estate in Jackson Hole? And he said, sure. He's got a 35,000 square foot, ranch, big log home. Well, his sister has a very liberal, anti-capitalist Marxist granddaughter or daughter who goes to an elite Ivy League school. So the entire book is the conversations that this girl has with her uncle, who she hates because he's a billionaire. And he kind of clues her in on, how, this is the way it really works, right? And and so like one scene, she says, "How much did that piece of artwork cost?" And he goes, "About $10,000." She goes, "Do you know what you could do with $10,000?" He goes, "Well, I could build a well in a village in Africa." She goes, "Yeah." She said, "I have a friend that does that every summer, and you're right, it's about $10,000. How did you know that?" He goes, "Oh, I built 1,000 of them last year." And she goes, "Huh?" And he goes, "That's what capitalism will do for you." And he says, "And you know what else? I built them across 3 African countries. And if you take those African countries, every single one of those countries has more money than I do. But it was a capitalist from America who built those wells."
Exactly.
So anyway, I'm 40% of the way writing this book, and God taps me on the shoulder and says, "I want you to stop, and I want you to write a different book. And I want you to write a book about revival." And I'm very involved in politics. I have been, for a very long time. But I also understand that our political problems are not our real problem. Our political problems are symptoms of our spiritual problem. And so I wrote a book about the need for revival of faith in America, because that's our real problem. And the craziness of the world that we look around at is a spiritual problem, not a political problem. So I ended up writing this book called The Coming American Revival. It's not a prediction. It's not a promise. It's not a prophecy. It's a declaration of faith. And when I started writing this book, I started looking around, and there has not been a significant book on revival written in America for 70 something years. It was in the 1950s when a British guy named Leonard Ravenhill, a British preacher named Leonard Ravenhill, who spent a lot of time in the US, wrote a book called Why Revival Tarries. Now, there's not been a widespread revival in America since the early 1970s, which was the Jesus People movement, the Calvary Chapel movement, which, that's 50 years ago. And for those of you, it's the movie Jesus Revolution sort of told that story year and a half ago when that movie came out. So I'm looking at this going, it's been 70 years since a book on revival has really done well. And it's been 50 years since we've seen a widespread revival. Now we're seeing revival popping up little bits and pieces, interestingly enough, through colleges and universities. And I talk about that in the book, the history of revival. We've had 3 great awakenings. We had the Azusa Street revival in the early 1900s, and the Jesus People revival in the early 1970s. So we're about due. Texas A&M had a revival here a couple weeks ago where 12 or 14,000 college students. About 2 years ago, Lee University, just up the road from me, I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee. They're in Cleveland, about 15 miles north. Lee University, a bunch of kids went to chapel, and they didn't leave for 2 weeks. Really interesting kinds of things, how God is moving and reviving people. And I remind people that revival, one of the things I love is I love words. I love breaking them down. Revival is a prefix, which means again, and vival comes from the Latin term viva, which means life. So revival just means life again.
Yeah.
And just like we need marriage revival, when you get married, you're fully in love, you love them, you want to spend all your time, you want to kiss them, all this kind of stuff. And eventually after, a little bit of marriage, a little bit of apathy can creep in, and we want a revival of our marriage. It's why we renew our marriage vows. We want to get back to that life that we really had in our marriage. And I think in many ways, it's the same with our relationship with God. We start out, we're all excited, and then life happens and we get drugged down and, this, that, and the other thing. And I really believe that God always wants to revive us, but it's really up to us to receive that and to open ourselves to it and to walk in it. So the book, Coming American Revival, it's interesting. I started writing it and everything started falling into place. I have 3 endorsements from very well-known people who I didn't even know when I started writing the book, but people heard about that I was writing the book, and I would get a text message. Got a text message from a friend of mine. He says, "Chris, I got you on here with Senator Tim Scott. I think he would love your book." So my cover endorsement is Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. Didn't know him when I first met him. John Rich, the country star, Big and Rich. Somebody said, "Hey, I want to introduce you to John." I sent the manuscript to John at 1 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. By 4 o'clock, he'd read it and sent me the endorsement.
Oh,
Um, Kirk Cameron, the actor.
yeah.
I've got naval admirals, professional baseball players. One guy's won 2 World Series as a pitcher in the major leagues. Just all sorts of people came out of the woodwork, which I really loved. I only have 2 pastors who endorse the book. Most of it is just business people and successful people who also realize we really need a revival.
There's
We
alignment.
need to get our relationship with God back in order.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned America's at a crossroads, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
in your views, what are the signs for you that have indicate? I mean, listen, it's all in our face, but I just want your perspective on this that indicate, our nation's really at this pivotal moment. There is a divide, for sure. But, talk to me about that.
Well, people always say, "Can we have unity in America?" And I say, absolutely not. There'll never be unity in America again. And the reason why is we have 2 conflicting worldviews. If you go back 70 years, everybody had the same worldview. They might have argued about how to get there, but you go back, if John F. Kennedy saw half the malarkey that we see every single day, he'd be like, "What in the world?" Let alone our founding fathers. Now, let's take Thomas Jefferson, for example. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. He was a deist, but he came from the same worldview, and that worldview is the Judeo-Christian capitalistic worldview. In the 1960s, there was a movement on the left, and they decided we need to overtake all of these institutions. It was very, very purposeful. It was choreographed. It was planned out. A guy named Robert Bork. Those of you who follow politics, you realize Robert Bork was the guy that was the first real bad fight in the U.S. Senate over a Supreme Court nomination, and they eventually they actually it's a verb now. We need to Bork him, right? And so they took Robert Bork and they ousted him. He ended up writing a book called "Slouching Towards Gomorrah" in 1999, and he laid out how the left decided to overtake our educational systems, our government, Hollywood, the media. And they basically said, if we can overtake those and we can develop the public schools, all of it, if we can overtake those, now we get to decide what the message is that all these people hear all the time and what they grow up with. And so now we have 2 conflicting worldviews. We have the traditional Judeo-Christian capitalistic worldview, and set against us is the secular humanist, Marxist, socialist, communist worldview.
Yeah.
And here's the problem. With the Judeo-Christian worldview, we serve God. In the secular humanist, atheist, Marxist worldview, God is the enemy. Why? Because the state is God. It's why during the Cold War, Russia taught their children to not believe in God, because the state was God. It's why in China now, it doesn't matter if you're the Falun Gong, I think is the name of it,
Yeah.
or Christian, or the Uyghurs. There's 2 million Uyghurs, which is sort of a Muslim sect. There's 2 million Uyghurs that are being held in concentration camps in China. Why? Because they represent this other ideology of God, right? And so Marxist states cannot have a competitor. And so we have the Judeo-Christian worldview up against the secular humanist Marxist worldview. And here's the real problem. Both sides see their perspective as having a moral, what's the word I'm looking for? Imperative, a moral imperative. So we no longer see people as being different with us or different from us with a different idea on how to get there. We see them as evil people who seek to destroy us. And they're no longer just different people; they're evil people, and I think that's probably the reason why we will never see unity in America again, because the Marxist worldview has basically captured 40% of the population, 30 to 40% of the population.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest barrier in preventing people. And listen, God can be, if you're Christian, Catholic, just whatever it is, and everybody has a God, right? And I respect that. Listen, you do yoga, you could have your own God. I mean, that's what it comes down to. But it's really embracing the barriers of a revival and what you're talking about. I think that's the biggest challenge. There's just so much noise out there, and with social media and things, you can look something up on a Instagram or a TikTok, and someone says it, and people believe it. And just because they said it on there doesn't mean that it's true. So I
Well,
think,
and I think morality wise, and some people are going to poo poo what I'm about to say, but if you think about it, in the 1950s, they wouldn't let Elvis when he was on the Ed Sullivan Show, they required that he be viewed from the waist up because they didn't want to see his legs shake. Um, Ricky Ricardo and Lucille Ball were not allowed to sleep in the same bed on the I Love Lucy show, even though they were married, and they were not allowed to use the word pregnant. Now, log on to Instagram, and every 40-year-old real estate agent in America is shaking her hind end on Instagram to try to sell houses. I mean, we've come a long way, right? And it's been gradual, and I don't believe it's been good for us.
yeah. So how do you think, I mean, actually, not so much how do you think, but how do you hope readers are going to engage, with the roadmap for the revival, especially those who are a little bit more hesitant, like we're talking about here, uncertain about the concept. If I'm open and I'm saying to myself, okay, I'm not so much bought into it, but I'm going to give it a shot. I mean, how do you hope they're going to engage with it?
I would use the analogy of a marriage.
Okay.
Because almost anybody who's been married 10 years or more has hit a rough spot in their marriage. Every now and then people go, I've been married 40 years and I've never had a fight with my wife. And I'm like, I'm sorry you have such a terrible marriage. Because if you put two people who absolutely love and adore each other, you jam them into a 1,500 square foot box for 10 years, there's going to be an argument, right? And so let's use that. It's the same way you would view that marriage. You've been married for 10 years. You hit a few rough spots. You hit a few dry spells. You annoy her. She annoys you. You got to really work at it. Wouldn't it be great to reinvigorate that marriage? The same relationship with God, just look at it as, what? I really want to reinvigorate my relationship with God. I want to be closer to God. I want to have more faith. I want to love God more. I want to know, what God's plan for my life is. That's the way I would view it. The same way you can reinvigorate a marriage is the same way you reinvigorate a relationship with God. You get to know the person better. You spend more time with the person. Look at it that way. Don't look at it as this big spiritual problem.
Yeah.
It's a relationship with God. It's not religion. It's a relationship with God. So it might mean spending 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, just picking up a daily devotional. Maybe you're a Christian and you're like, I just don't feel close to God. Go on to Amazon, if you're a man, type in men's devotionals, or, my wife and I, we get up every morning. First thing we do, make a cup of coffee, sit down on the couch. We read one chapter of the Bible. This morning we read Hebrews chapter 10. Tomorrow it'll be Hebrews chapter 11. We read a few pages from a book, usually a marriage book or a deeper, how to commit a deeper relationship with God type of book. And then we pray together for the day. Every single day. It takes us less than 20 minutes, and we spend time at it. So if you want to do it with your spouse, go onto Amazon, type in couples devotionals. If you're a woman, you type in women's devotionals. There's little books that you can get that 365 days or a month or whatever. It's usually a Bible verse, a thought for the day, and a prayer. If you just started with that, you would, over the course of time, just go, you know what? I'm starting to think differently. I'm starting to perceive differently. I'm starting to have a little more hope. I'm starting to have a little more faith. You don't have to go, I'm going to commit to going to mass every day at 9 a.m. for the next 3 years.
I wanted to ask you this. I wanted to ask you this because this is, I was brought up Catholic. Okay. Yep. When I was a kid, we went to church, and then my parents weren't very disciplined in the fact after a certain amount of time of bringing us to church. So I always had this foundational belief in God and have my relationship with God. But I'm gonna be very frank with you. I don't go to church all the time, but I do pray every day. Okay. So with you, being so connected to the church and having someone, like myself who I do believe I have a relationship with God. but I'm not going to the church every week. I'm very thankful. I have my vision on what I want to do to serve for people and help them, and there's other things there. But how do you feel about that connection of people who maybe don't pray every day but have that relationship with God in their own mind?
Well, I'll agree with you. You do not have to go to church in order to be a Christian.
Okay.
In fact, when we say church, if I say to you church, what do you think of? You think of a big building with a steeple and a sign outside that says First Baptist. That is not the term church in the New Testament. Nobody ever talked about a building. The church is Christians. That is the church. And so we call it little c Catholic, right? The Universal Catholic Church, not big C Catholic, Roman Catholic, but little c Catholic. In the early creeds of the early church, they use that term. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, blah, 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 the Holy Catholic Church, but they don't mean the Roman Catholic Church. They mean the Universal Church. So I would say that you do not have to go to a building, but I will also say this. You should be involved with other people of faith. You should be involved in a community of faith. The Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. When you get together, if we're men, so I'll come from my perspective. You get together with a group of men who share your faith, and you just kind of share your struggles and you pray for each other. That's church. That's church. Yeah. Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 of you get together in my name, I'm right there with you. So, and I was a pastor, right? So I used to say to people sometimes, I'd say, listen, if you knew what, went on in my mind, and I'm just a human, just like you are. I have sin, I have temptation, I have if you knew what went on in my mind, you probably wouldn't come to church here. And of course, they'd all laugh. And I'd say, whoa, wait a minute. If I knew what went on in your mind, I wouldn't let you come here, right? And so the reality is we're all in this together. We're all sinners. We all fail. We all have temptation. Yeah. The role of the church is to get together and to encourage one another. And so I believe that we need to be involved with a community of faith. I don't necessarily think that means St. Jude's Catholic Church or First Baptists of your town, but I do believe that being involved in a church to the degree that it puts you in proximity with other people who are going on the same journey, I think that's helpful.
I think that's a great perspective. Thank you. That's a great perspective on this, especially being as involved in the church as you are. That's why I wanted to ask that question to really understand your perspective on that. So thank you. All right, before we wrap this up, a couple more questions. But how do you see this book impacting not just individuals, but more of a broader movement in this?
Here's what I tell people. Okay. In fact, I posted on Facebook again today. Okay. Go to Amazon. You can go to Amazon by going to comingamericanrevival.com. Comingamericanrevival.com. It's going to take you right to Amazon. Buy 2 copies of the book. Buy one for you to read and buy one for your pastor to read. Hand it to your pastor and say, I bought a book for you. I'm wondering if you would read it and if we could get together in a month or so and talk about it. Well, number one, you will thrill your pastor. your pastor's just hoping that somebody will take the bull by the horns and really, get involved. And then go to lunch with your pastor and say, I love this book. I love the principles of it. I think we both agree that we'd love to see our church more invigorated and more loving and more outreach and helping the poor and all these kinds of things. How can I help you? Say that to your pastor. How can I help you with the ministry of our church so that our church can come alive again? Your pastor is waiting for people to, most pastors are just waiting for somebody to say, how can I help revive our church? How can I help ministry go better? Because a lot of pastors, they feel lonely, they feel tired, they don't get paid much, they live in a fishbowl, they get judged, all the time. Their children get judged, all this kind of stuff. And that's that's just in the the physical realm. You throw in spiritual battles that go on. One of the things I think the devil works overtime on pastors because, as the Bible says, if you strike the shepherd, the sheep will scatter. And so, we look at a pastor who takes a fall or has something, and everybody goes, I knew this wasn't true, and off they go, right? Doesn't mean that it's not true. It means that your pastor lost a battle.
Yeah.
So buy 2 copies, hand one to your pastor. You read it, he reads it, and go to lunch with him in a month and say, how can I help this happen?
There you go, man. There you go. Listen, last question. How can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out, want to contact you, get in touch with you? How can they get in touch with you, Chris?
Really simple, chriswidener.com. My email comes straight to me as chris@chriswidener.com. You can call me if you want. My number is 877-212-4747. Or 877-21-CHRIS if you want to remember it that way, 877-21-CHRIS. But no, if folks are looking for some mentorship, particularly like spiritual business kind of stuff, happy to help. Yeah, I'm excited about the path that God has me on and the message I have for people, because I want people to have a closer relationship with God. I've been a Christian for 41 years now, and my relationship with God is better than it's ever been in 41 years.
It's great, man. It's great. I have thoroughly enjoyed
Me too.
the show. I really have. It's been engaging. I've learned a lot from you. Your passion, obviously, speaks volumes. And I look forward to staying in touch with you and continuing the relationship. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
He is Chris Widener. I am Dave Slyman. I always wish everybody wealth, health, and success. Thanks for joining this show. Listen, like this show, share this show. We appreciate all your support out there, and we will see you next time on the Sales Proformance Podcast Show. Thanks again, Chris. Appreciate you appreciate you being here.
The Sales Proformance Show.